You're listening to Building the Broncos with Nick Kendell and Carl Dumler, Broncos country's leading draft and scouting analysts. Get on over to milehighhuddle.com to sound off on all things Broncos.
Hello there, Broncos country, and it is once again time for another episode of Building the Broncos. I am your host, Carl Dumler, and with me as always, I have my co-host and good friend, Mr. Nick Kendell. Nick, how are you doing out there, buddy?
Hey, doing pretty well. A little bit irritated that I left my normal recording headset in the Quad Cities, so apologize for my sound quality. It's a little bit more baritone and not as clear as normal, but hey, you know, you gotta roll with the punches, you know, comeback kid. So hopefully it's not too bad.
And of course, we would like to welcome back one of our favorite people to have here on the podcast, Mr. Erick Trickel, one of our lead analysts there at Mile High Huddle, and of course, one of our draft junkies. I mean, I think it'd be a toss-up between you two of who is the top guy that just absolutely just lives and breathes the draft.
I'll give it to Eric that title if he wants it.
I would happily take that title with how much work I've done into this year. You realize I actually counted out the other day. I'm already at over 280 scouting reports sent in. Nowhere nearly all of them are published.
That's
I just counted it out the other day.
That's impressive, man. And so that's what you're getting here today on our podcast. And we want to make sure that you can follow us on Twitter, because I know Eric and Nick, they both especially have great thoughts thrown out there for the Twitter universe on the draft and everything. I mean, of course, Nick has to have some Game of Thrones thoughts, but I want you to know where to find us. I'm at Carl Dumler, MHH. Of course, then you have Eric at Erick Trickel, and of course, Nick at Nick Kendell, MHH. And you can follow the podcast Twitter account at BTB Football Pod. And make sure you subscribe to our show and leave us a rating, as we value your input on our show. You can find us on iTunes, Stitcher, and even that of YouTube. Also, make sure you head over to Mile High Huddle, an affiliate of 24/7 Sports and the CBS Sports Digital, to find ours and our co-writers' articles on all things pertaining to your Denver Broncos. This podcast is powered by Overtime Media. Well, getting ready to head into the draft here in just 9 days. That just seems so crazy. It's been this crazy build-up to get to this point, but we're so close. Next week, and it's going to be here. But we thought we'd do a little episode with Eric and kind of the pound the table moments. Yeah, we always heard of moments where coaches would kind of stand up on a table, or I think it was who was it? Was it Bill Kollar that was really pound the table to get Adam Gotsis?
Yes.
And so you know this happens, that these guys really kind of say, hey, this is that one guy that I absolutely want. We're going to do 3 guys that each of us want, and just kind of say why we think this is a perfect fit for the Broncos, why we want this player and would be ecstatic, and where we think maybe they're going to go in the draft as well. But Nick, I'm going to start here with you. Who was your first pound the table player?
Well, I'm going to start this off by saying I might be a little bit biased here, because I did go to this team's pro day, and I ended up sitting by this player's mother and sister, and they were both just delightful, very nice, very funny, and got to talk with him and his agent and all of that. And I'm talking about wide receiver from Missouri, Emanuel Hall. Very, very fun player this past year. He has dealt with some tragedy in this past season. He had his father pass away unexpectedly, which was devastating for him. It happened during the season, and then he had a groin injury that he suffered as well. But man, I've watched a lot of Drew Lock tape this year, because obviously the Broncos looking at him, being a lot of reports that they were intrigued with him pretty early. But man, the guy that always stood out to me was Emanuel Hall, the wide receiver, and then he got my attention again at the combine. I mean, measured in pretty good size at nearly 6'2", 200 pounds, which for a speed threat like him, that's solid size. And then the wingspan and the hand size, 85th percentile arm length, 76th percentile hand size, a 40-yard dash of 4.39. And again, speaking with his agent, he said that Hall was recording sub 4.35s prior to his injury, and he actually had to sign a waiver at the combine to participate in the field drills, because they were worried about re-aggravating that groin injury, making it worse. And he gave consent. He's like, I put on all this effort, and I wanted to test out here and show what I made. So 4.39 with a groin injury is, that's pretty darn impressive, especially if he can run faster than that. This is an 87th percentile. But then he goes out there and he jumps like an absolute freak. 43.5 vertical jump, 98th percentile, 141 broad jump, 99th percentile. That is with with a groin injury. So he's definitely on the up and up. He's still not 100%. I remember watching him at the pro day a lot. He didn't do anything, any runs or anything, and he was out there running back and forth, stretching a lot of those, like, kind of lifting the legs up, running backwards, whatnot, trying to stretch it out. And then he went out there and looked pretty darn good in the throwing drills with Andrew Luck. I'll go through some of his pros and cons now. Like I said, really good size and power for a guy with his kind of playing ability. Normally you see those vertical threats like John Brown or Kenny Stills or Brandon Cooks. They're little guys. Not the case for Emanuel Hall. He's got good size and good power. He's a built dude. He's bigger than me, and I'm not a small guy myself. And you got to love that speed as a vertical threat. I mean, the Broncos have been saying they've been looking for a deep threat. That's something that made a player like Joe Flacco in his prime really, really good. I mean, Steve Smith, better receiver for him. Obviously, you got guys like Anquan Bolden in his heyday, really good for him. But, I mean, really good when Joe Flacco's at his best. He's had a real true deep threat, and that's Emanuel Hall. One thing I really like about him is a lot of times you see these fast receivers, they struggle with press. And Emanuel Hall, man, he is a dog with his releases. He has multiple packages of getting off the release, but he's very strong and physical getting off the release. And I think his ball tracking improved over time. I do think he's also very sudden. He has the ability to start and stop on a dime. And wasn't really asked to do it so much at Missouri this past year as that primary deep threat. But I think he has underrated yards after catch ability. He won't make many guys miss in the open field. He's not super creative in that regard, but he can outrun them, and he will put his head down and fight for a few extra yards. But again, a really true take the top off the defense kind of guy. Mike Wallace, Kenny Stiller, Will Fuller, or Kenny Stills, Will Fuller, all guys that stand out to me. And over the last 2 years, I mean, just putting it in perspective, what a big play the guy he is. 23.6 yards per reception. Amazing. Really, that's really just a good number for him. Now, obviously, there's some cons to him, and it really comes down to something that's a major concern. It's something that's going to keep him from going in the top 50, top 2 rounds, but he had his fair share of drops while at Missouri. A lot of comparable stuff to Will Fuller in that regard. He'd get open deep, and he'd be there, and then Locke would put it right there, and the ball would just hit him in his hand. So definitely a concern there. Double catches sometimes, not full extension, something he's going to need to work on. He also has had some injuries, and a concern with me with the Broncos specifically, he doesn't always make the best ability when he's going after it as a blocker. And also he needs to be a little bit more physical at the catch point. He can allow guys to get into his frame and compete for the ball despite his size. So overall, I think probably a late round 3 grade would be where I would put him, considering the injuries and the overall limitations. I mean, his route tree is also still developing, but as far as a Z with the ability to get off press and deep playability and upside, man, I think he has a lot of upside, and I would love to get him. I think pick 71 is too early for him just because of the injury and the concerns with his hands and whatnot. But if Denver could get him round 4 with the Houston pick, because Denver doesn't have their own own 4th round pick anymore because they traded it for Flacco. But if they could get him round 4, man, I would be very excited, especially if you compare him with Drew Lock round 1. I mean, that automatic chemistry would be great. Final takeaway: amazing vertical threat and an athlete that didn't really get a show off his true speed because of the groin injury. Hands are a concern, but if you can get that deep speed ability day 3 to open up the offense, I think that'd be huge for Flacco and whoever the quarterback is. So especially, it's not only the catching, but the pass interference, the spot fouls with him down the field would be huge as well. So I think he's a really good option as a deep threat from the Z, and he could be a really good player. So that's my take. Emanuel Hall, wide receiver from Missouri, a guy that I would pound the table for round 4 for the Broncos if he's there.
Very good choice. I'm doing a mock draft where you have 31 other GMs for each team has a GM. And of course I'm the Broncos, and I just took him in the 4th round, and I had some people that were pretty upset because they were trying to trade up for him. So I think that's a great pick for the Broncos, exactly what they're looking to add to their wide receiver core right now. And even there with his injury, he's going to have some time to heal up because he doesn't have to be a full-time starter day 1. So that's a nice part for him. He can just come in and use his skills of being that deep ball threat. And so I think that's a great guy to pound the table for. Yeah,
and I mean, the hands are a concern. The injuries are a concern. But if those weren't an issue, I think you're talking about a guy that could be, potentially a top 40, top 50 pick. So, I mean, those guys are kind of obvious. I mean, I didn't want to go too obvious. I'm pounding the table for the best player in the draft, Nick Bosa. I'm pounding the table for Quinnen Williams. So I think that Emanuel Hall in that regard, he's not – there are flaws, but I think what he brings to the table and his skill set is something that the Broncos are severely lacking. And if you're taking him round 1, there is some absolutely to his game. I'll be completely honest. People are going to have red flags going up when I say that name. But if you can get that type of player day 3. I mean, that's a value.
That's for sure. All right, well, the guy I'm going to pound the table for here to start off with, I'm going to stick with wide receiver. I was the last one to fill out our outline, and I saw you guys both pick some weapons. And so I kind of went with a player that I probably will get a little pushback on, and that's Jalen Hurd, wide receiver from Baylor. And I've just started watching him over the last month a little bit more. I didn't really pay too much attention to him, but I think this is one of those guys who really is just scratching the surface of what he can do as a receiver. If you remember, he was a running back for a long time, then all of a sudden made the switch now to wide receiver. He wasn't a great running back, but he was okay. Nothing too scary, but I love what this guy brings to the table. He's got the size. He's 6'4", which, I mean, I can't believe he was playing running back, because 6'4" running backs just don't hardly exist. But again, for a wide receiver, that's perfect. 226 pounds. I mean, he's got that size weight combination that you're looking for. He's strong. He's got big hands, and it shows on tape. I mean, that's one thing I love about him is he has very natural hands, considering he played running back for so long. And I know one area that he is struggling a little bit is his route running, but he was more developed than I thought he would be, considering making that kind of switch, only having 1 year as a wide receiver. And the other thing I loved about him is he can play both inside and outside. Nick and I have talked about it on this show quite a bit, of those big slot wide receivers. They're really starting to take over the NFL, and his power to really get off any kind of press coverage or anything like that is something that I think can be a huge asset. I don't think he's exactly the type of wide receiver the Broncos are looking for, but again, I mean, just adding this kind of talent who, again, is just scratching the surface. He won't be required year one to be that huge, big-time player. He can have a year to kind of get used to playing in the NFL and then take over year 2, year 3, all those kind of things. But there's just not many guys who move like him. He has that little bit of wiggle to his game because of his running back days. He's got an ability to make people miss in the open field. He can make the tough catches. He can just do about everything that you want. He just needs to be refined. That's his main thing. I mean, if you're looking at that one really, really big weakness for him, it's just experience. It's going to take some time. He's not going to be your year one big time contributor. But the other area that I did question a little bit is he doesn't have the great short area quickness. But again, he's 6'4", so you don't expect that as much. And so those two things are a little bit of concern for me. But if this guy ever reaches his full potential, you could have a real great talent that you get maybe in that 4th round area. That I think he is starting to work his way up some boards. Some people are starting to notice him a lot more. And he's a guy that I'd be willing to pound the table for. I think he can really turn into something. And again, just having that kind of size on the outside, or even having him on the slot. I mean, can you imagine teams lining up against these guys? A slot corner at 5'10", trying to go against this guy at 6'4". You got a 3rd and 5 play, and you just have him run that quick slant play.
You want to get a matchup safety at that point.
Well, yeah, you might see that too. But even there, I mean, I love that matchup.
Yeah.
I think he can definitely win that matchup more times than lose them. And it's just, I think he would be I think he's going to be one of the more interesting prospects to see what they do in the NFL. Just because, again, he started out at running back, make that switch to wide receiver. I mean, you saw that with who was the guy who was drafted by the Raiders who became a wide receiver? He was a quarterback.
Oh, Tyrell Pryor.
Yeah. He made that switch, and he did okay. He had his one really big year. But, I mean, it's just always interesting seeing guys try to make that switch. And a lot of them, most of them fail. So probably this is one of those guys that people are going to look back and they're going to say, Carl, you pounded the table for this guy, and he did nothing. I mean, this is a very high ceiling, very low floor kind of guy. But I'm willing to take a chance on him, especially in those mid rounds, that he could become something.
I have watched a bit of his tape. I mean, I won't lie, watching Big 12 football, if it's not, maybe Texas or Oklahoma, sometimes can be not as enjoyable for an old school, cranky Big Ten fan like myself. But I did like watching Jalen Hurd. He's not as, like you said, super duper explosive going forward, but I think he's pretty darn smooth. And if he puts it together, I would like him. I do think that round 3 would be a little bit high for me to take him. I think just because he's got a ways to go. There's question about the production and whatnot. I think maybe I would probably give round 5 for myself. But I mean, there is a lot to be liked about his game. And I agree with you, though, that he is being majorly slept on right now. I feel like I've heard very little people talk about his game. And he's got upside, especially, not only as a receiver, but something that obviously as a running back, that yak ability is there. So that's something you gotta look for with a player like him.
Well, Eric, who's your first person that you're pounding the table for?
Well, real quick, since you guys talked about yours a little bit, just throw this out there, is I have Jalen Hurd as a late 5th round pick for me. So I agree with Nick about 3rd round being a little bit high. My biggest issue with him is that he looks so unnatural playing receiver to me. It looks like there's a lot more effort for him just doing some of the things that should come easier for receivers. So that's one issue there. But I do think that he has a really high ceiling, especially if he gets it all put together. As for my pound the table guy,
what about Emanuel Hall?
I like Emanuel Hall, but I have a hard time getting past the drops and the injuries.
Yeah.
If it was just one or the other, then I could see it a little bit more. And I have Hall rated as a early 5th round pick. I could get on board taking him about mid round 2, but just those injuries and those issues with the drops, and I don't see as much yak ability in him as you do. I think he's more so just that deep runner. I do think he can challenge all 3 levels of the field, but I'm just not seeing it enough after the catch to really say he's got serious potential there. As for my guy, I'm going with the tight end, and this is a guy that I have graded as a mid-3rd round pick, who I think that goes somewhere in that 3rd, 4th round range. I could see him falling a little bit because of how this tight end class is. I could see it because of the level of competition that he faced sometimes, and I could see it just because about the 3rd round, late 2nd to about mid-4th is the sweet spot for me in this draft. That's where a lot of good talent's going to go. And one reason why I went with this guy is because he's a team leader. He's a guy who's sitting there at tight end, and you don't see guys like this at tight end very often, who's going to rally the troops around him. It doesn't matter if you're down by 14 or up by 14. He's going to sit there and try to get everybody to play every snap the hardest they possibly can. And that's Josh Oliver out of San Jose State. Another reason why I really like him is because he tested similarly to a tight end I liked a few years ago in Austin Hooper out of Stanford. Now, the reason why I bring that up is because the current tight end coach for the Denver Broncos was the guy who was with the Falcons when they drafted Austin Hooper in Wade Harman. Wade Harman did a really good job of developing Hooper in his 3 years that he was with him. Each year, you saw steady progression from Austin Hooper. He is highly thought of in the NFL for his ability to develop tight ends, and I think that Josh Oliver has a good foundation to start with as developing him as a receiver tight end. He's a guy who has enough athleticism and speed to stretch the seam, but he has a huge catch radius. He's really athletic, scored 8.18 on the RAS score, and he uses his size really well. His route tree is actually really well developed for a tight end, especially coming from a smaller school like San Jose State. He has potential to be a number 1 tight end. You do want to sit there and work with him on blocking, which is something that I think that Denver would definitely be able to do because it is rather lackluster. He does give tremendous effort, but it's just not enough really at this point to be that number 1 guy. But if they want an athletic tight end who can be a receiver that fits with what Joe Flacco needs from the tight end position, Josh Oliver is the guy to go. He's going to be more of a slot tight end than inline guy. You move around a little bit, try to create mismatches. But Denver doesn't have a guy like that. They don't have a guy who's as athletically gifted as him at the tight end position. Jeff Hireman's not close to it. Jake Butt, if he's ever able to see the field consistently, he's not that guy. And Troy Fumagalli, we don't really know what he is, but he's not a very athletic guy either. I think Denver needs more of an athlete, and that is why he is my guy. I would jump on him in late 2nd personally, but again, I think that he ends up going somewhere in that late 3rd, early 4th, and I can see Denver trying to move up for him after going elsewhere with their 3rd round pick. But you get that leadership. You get a guy who is going to be a big target for Joe Flacco, athletic, can stretch the seam, can go up and get the ball, can do all this stuff for an offense, and adds a whole nother aspect to your passing game that Denver just does not have right now.
I do have just a little bit of concerns with his lackluster blocking, as you noted, because looking at, just pointing the finger to what the San Francisco 49ers have done with that single tight end formation, they had to have a guy that could do both, a lot of 11 personnel. And I do think Oliver, he does have the frame where I think he can become an adequate blocker, but not the boon to the run game that you see a guy like George Kittle, where an 11 personnel, I think you got to have a guy that can do a little bit of both, where if you're using more 2 tight end sets, I think you can have a little bit more of a big tight end slot kind of guy. Is that a concern with you at all as far as the system fit? Are you expecting more 2 tight end sets for the Broncos? I've just been looking at guys, personally, I've been looking at guys a little bit more blocking upside that can be in line as well as a solid receiver. I've been giving up a little bit of receiving ability for blocking upside.
I do agree, as I said earlier, and as you highlighted, that the blocking is a little bit of a concern. It is very lackluster. I love the effort he gives, and I love his work ethic and desire to improve. I think that Denver has the right coaching in place to sit there and really develop his blocking, and I think that he's got the attitude to be able to develop it. I don't think he'll be a tremendous blocker by any means, but I think you can develop him because he's got the size, he's got the frame, he's got the right traits to be a good blocker, and I think that if you're able to get all those things, then he can be that number one guy that can do that and be good enough of a blocker to where you can leave him out there and he can be that lead blocker in the running game off the edge and not have to worry about it.
That makes a lot of sense. And it's a really good tight end class. So I'm praying for him round 4. I wouldn't have an issue with them taking him round 3. I do like another tight. Honestly, I went back and forth on a few different tight ends here. I have a tight end coming up as well. Spoiler alert. But a guy that I would you take, just a little name association here. Would you take Josh Oliver over Jay Sternberger?
Yes.
Would you take him over either of the Iowa guys?
Over the Iowa guys? No.
Okay, I'm just testing you there. Just kind of finding the threshold.
The reason why I would take him over Sternberger is I see more potential in Oliver as a blocker. And I think as a receiver, they're very close. I think Sternberger might have a little bit of an edge there. But it just comes down to that blocking. They're both rather closely graded for me as well. Just throw that out there.
Okay, a few more names just because, again, this is a really good tight end class. Irv Smith.
I don't know. I actually have gone back and forth about that. I really like Irv Smith's tape, but there's been things that have come up that have made me hesitant, and I do have a high grade on him, but I've really strongly considered lowering his grade a little bit with what I've heard. With that one, it would really depend on where am I taking them. If I'm taking Irv Smith in the early second or Josh Oliver in the 4th, I would definitely take Josh Oliver in the 4th over Irv Smith in the early second. Yeah. Probably where I'd be comfortable taking Irv Smith at this point would probably be that late second, early 3rd over Josh Oliver in like the 3rd round or 4th.
Okay, 2 more names for you here. One being Dawson Knox.
This is one that's actually really close. When I was going through my grading scale, they're very closely graded. But if I remember right, Dawson Knox is graded just slightly higher.
Okay.
Oh, no. Josh Oliver is graded just slightly higher than Dawson Knox is. And Jay Sternberger is graded slightly higher than Josh Oliver.
Okay.
But with how I view these players and where I view they're at, I would actually take Knox over Oliver because my grading scale is really wonky, just so everybody knows that.
Matches the analyst. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, it does. But I don't do much with my grading scale for projection of players, and I think Dawson Knox has a much higher ceiling than Josh Oliver, especially as a blocker. I think that he can get close to him as a receiver, but I think the blocking is what would set him apart, and that is why I would take Knox over Oliver.
All right, and one more. Kahale Warren, San Diego State.
I would take Josh Oliver over Kahale Warren, unless it's like taking Josh Oliver round 2 and Warren in like round 6. If you're talking about in the same range, Josh Oliver instantly.
Man, I really like Kahale Warren. But
I do too.
All right, well, it's a good tight end class. So we'll talk a little bit. I don't know if hopefully I didn't go over your guys, Carl, but we're going to take a quick break. We're going to be right back with more guys we pound the table for.
This is the Overtime Podcast Network.
All righty, and we're back, and I kind of switched up the order here so it's not as monotonous. And we're going back to Eric here with your second pound the table player.
Now, the Denver Broncos are switching their offensive scheme, and so that is a big reason why I'm pounding the table for this guy, is because he is probably the second best scheme fit on the interior offensive line in this draft. Maybe third. Well, second best guard scheme fit for this, because Garrett Bradbury is the best fit at center. But anyways, I digress. As I said, this guy fits the scheme perfectly. He's excellent moving laterally, has great technique for his own blocking scheme. He's got position versatility because he has experience at center, guard, and tackle. And this is a guy from South Carolina, Zach Bailey. I absolutely really like him. This is a guy that I think that I'm going to be a lot higher on than people in the NFL because I really like his ability to block on the move, the athleticism, the technique, and all that stuff for the zone scheme. But he is very scheme limited, and that is why I think that teams will be a little bit lower on him. He will need to get a little bit stronger for the NFL and improve his technique and pass protection because it is a little weird at times, and it does lead to him getting beat every now and then. I also think that he will need to get a little bit more power in his punch to jolt defensive linemen early on in the pass rush attempt. And this is a guy, as I said, I have him as a mid-third grade, but I think you could probably snag him in the fourth. I really love his scheme fit. Guy's a team captain as well. Would come in, he can immediately compete at guard. He can slide out to and potentially even start at guard over Elijah Wilkinson. I mean, even if you want to move Connor McGovern back, you can put Bailey at center and be more comfortable about it. I'd be a little bit more concerned personally, and then if he loses a tackle, he can slide over and play tackle. Like he's got that versatility. He's got the experience at multiple spots. And again, it just comes back to being a perfect scheme fit for what the Broncos want to do offensively with their blocking scheme. And he's got the right attitude as well.
Yeah, that's a good one. I have watched a little bit of him. I feel like I've watched more Dennis Daly, and I do remember Zach Bailey standing out. I do got to ask you talked a little bit about some other guys. What do you think about Guyard from Georgia? He's somebody that Brandon Thorne has pointed out to me saying just an absolute perfect fit for a zone blocking scheme as a center, and doing more digging on him. His teammates absolutely love him. He's somebody that I almost went with in this piece today.
Lamont Gaylord, the center?
Yes.
I actually really like him. He would probably be up there in scheme fit. I do like Zach Bailey a little bit more. I do think that they both are excellent scheme fits. But the only reason why I would actually take Bailey over Gaylord is because Gaylord can get a little bit emotional on the field, and it leads to some really bad stuff. Some bad penalties, stuff like that. And a couple times, if I remember right, there was a couple late hits that he got called for and a couple others that he didn't. So that's the big reason why. It's just the emotions of Lamont Gaylord gets him in trouble.
I would say that the biggest thing for me, if I was discerning the two, is I think Zach Bailey offers a little bit more positional versatility. I think Gaylord is very limited to center. He's not a big guy.
Yeah, I think he's definitely just a center as well. But even then, I think that he offers a little bit higher of a football IQ than Zach Bailey does.
Yeah.
And so
his teammates would go to war for him.
Yeah, and that's the other thing. I haven't heard anything about Zach Bailey as the teammate. I mean, he was a team captain. I know he's been spoken about as a good leader, but I don't know how he was with drawing his teammates to him. So just those things, I do think that it just really came down to the emotions of Gaylord, really, even though he is less position versatile, just other things with Bailey that still keep it close.
For sure. Well, we're going to keep it on the interior offensive line here. Carl, you're up now with your second pound table player.
Well, I had to go a high round pick guy here. I went with Chris Lindstrom, offensive guard of Boston College. And I guess, I mean, the reason I'm willing to pound the table for this guy is when I'm looking for weaknesses to this guy's game, I'm not finding many. I mean, there's some things he can clean up, but I mean, he can handle guys that have the power side of things. He can handle guys that have athleticism. I just think when you're looking at the AFC West and you're looking at guys like Chris Jones, I mean, the Raiders might be taking, I know this is going to hurt a lot of people, but Quinnen Williams could possibly get to them. I mean, there's going to be some athleticism on the interior. And so being able to get a guy that you can plug and play and you can know that he's going to start there for probably at least the first 4 years, but obviously even I think he'll be a second contract, third contract kind of guy. And I love he has great footwork. He's intelligent. He's got power. He's got active hands. When I'm thinking of the Broncos this upcoming season, I mean, you know that they're going to be leaning on the run game. I mean, it's run, play action. And when you got the running backs that we do, you got a quarterback and Joe Flacco that can make sure that the defense has to stay honest of making sure that nothing gets beat over the top. I mean, having a guy like this who just loves to get in there and do the dirty work and can get to the second level. And again, he's worked in an offense that was very run heavy. So I guess maybe my one concern is just a little bit of his pass blocking because he just wasn't asked to do it as much as you would like. But even there, I saw times where he did well with knowing when there was blitzes coming and knowing how to pick up the blitz, knowing how to handle combos that were going on with defense tackles, defensive ends, all those kind of things. I mean, I just really like what this guy brings. And if the Broncos, I don't think, I mean, they won't take him at 10. I mean, that's pretty obvious. But I do think he has first round value. And if they can get him there in the second round, because sometimes offensive guards, even if they are that kind of player, they still fall just because of the position value. But maybe at 41, they might have to trade up to get him. I'm not quite sure how that's all going to work out because especially Nick and I talked about it on our last episode and talking with Reisner because he's like, Reisner even said, if you're expecting to get me at 41, you're not getting me at 41. And I think maybe that's the same thing with Lindstrom where you're probably not getting him at 41. But I love this guy. I really do. I think he fits very much in the value. If you get him after pick 20, he is, again, that plug-and-play starter day one. I don't have any questions about that. And I think he is one of those guys that can really hold up against a very wide range of defensive players coming at him. And for the Broncos, that would be huge to have that kind of player in the middle. And, I mean, again, Nick and I talked about this last time of as much as you love having Munchak and what he can do in developing players, he still had talented players to work with too. So you still need to try to get as much talent as you can for that offensive line, win the trenches. And this is the guy that definitely wins in the trenches.
Yeah, and I got to say, I really like Lindstrom as well. I'm wondering if he's a candidate to be Braden Smithed, so to speak. You know, drafted, he played tackle before in college, moved to guard his last season in college, and then moved back out to tackle. Have you thought about anything about that versatility? And I know probably most of my exposure has been him at guard where he was good. I mean, no doubt about it, you know, late first round, very early second round talent. But what do you think about him at tackle potentially as well?
Well, I mean, we always talk about some of the measurements, I guess, and he does have that 34-inch arms. So he does meet that kind of threshold. He meets he's a little bit shorter than you like, but he's right there at the edge. I mean, there's no problem there. A little bit of a wingspan issue, I'd say, but I think he could do it. I think if the Broncos absolutely need him to do it because he's got good feet. He's not going to be the best tackle by any means, I think, but I would still feel pretty comfortable with him moving out there. I would rather see him stay at that right guard spot because I think that's his most natural position. But you never know. I mean, it's emergencies happen, and I'd rather have a quality starter at that right tackle spot than I would at the right guard spot because again, as much as I think about Chris Jones and some of those guys, there's great pass rushers all through. The edge rush is just pretty incredible right now in the NFL, and it's going to get even better after this draft.
Well, speaking of transition there about potentially, you know, some pass rush specifically from the interior, my second pound the table guy, which is a guy I've been on for a long time. I mean, this has been my guy from probably since late October, and that's Jeffery Simmons, interior defensive lineman from Mississippi State. And he's 6'4", 300 pounds, but man, he carries that weight really well. You know, some of those defensive linemen, they kind of look a little bit doughy. You know, they can stand to lose 15, 25 pounds, Dexter Lawrence. But anyway, Jeffery Simmons, man, this dude is a tank. And unfortunately, we did not get to see him at the Combine because he tore his ACL in training for the upcoming draft process. So that's going to hamper him. There are some thinking he might be able to come back and play November on, but there's a real chance that he could miss his entire first season due to that ACL. And there's also an off-the-field incident before he was in college where he got involved in a scuffle. It was a neighborhood brawl where it was involving his sister and rival family, a family that they've been kind of feuding with for a while. And some things were said about a dead family member, and these two women got involved in a physical altercation. Jeffery Simmons got involved. There were punches thrown. He was on top. It looks bad for a guy as big as Jeffery Simmons, that's for sure. However, since then, he's been a model citizen. He's won multiple awards about leadership on and off the field. And a lot of people that hearing secondhand for sure, but hearing that he's really just grown from this experience. So got to talk about all that stuff first before we get into the pros and cons. He is an absolute unit along the defensive line. And for an offensive line or defensive line that had as much talent as that Mississippi State unit had, I think he was probably the most talented player on there. I know Montez Sweat tested out the gym. He's an edge rusher, but man, Jeffery Simmons is the guy who I'm drawn to. Often the first guy off the line of scrimmage, long, explosive twitch, and versatile. I think he can play one technique all the way down to 5 technique due to the speed and length that he possesses. Really powerful at the point of attack. I've seen comparisons of Ndamukong Suh. I don't know if he's that much of a displacer. Granted, Big 12 versus SEC, there's a little bit of a difference there, but so powerful, and a surprising number of pass rush moves as well at the snap. He can play 1 gap or 2 gap, which I really like, and he has the power to split double teams as a pass rusher, and he's really good at running and filling run gaps, which, I mean, if you run at him, good luck. Speed to power, jolts blockers, wins with leverage, and he has a great hump move. It's not as good as Vita Vea was last year, granted, a much bigger guy, but really good hump move, and plays with a white-hot motor. So just a really fun, dynamic player. I would compare him more so to Fletcher Cox, but, I mean, Ndamukong Suh's one that's been thrown out as well that I could see. Some cons, though, he doesn't always read the play well. You know, he sometimes is more concerned about firing upfield, and that can get him out of position. However, he does a really good job at reading screens. That's something that really good at that. He also doesn't always show off the best anchor against double teams. He's not a true 0/1 technique, like nose tackle type. I think he can do it in sub-package, but it's not his true position. He does need to work on his counters. His initial move will be great, but he doesn't do the best job of stringing moves together. So if he could get a counter pass rush move, if that first one doesn't work, look out, man. He is going to be unbelievably dynamic. And sometimes he can freelance and lose some discipline. Overall, I think that if it wasn't for the ACL, he would have been a top 5 talent on my board, behind Quinnen Williams, above Ed Oliver. And I think with this ACL, I have him just outside of the top 20. But, man, I'd have no issue trading down and taking him because I know you need instant impact. That's great with a first-round pick. But if you can get an interior pass rusher that has top 5 upside like he does and the versatility, I just think he's a perfect fit, perfect talent for this team. So why he's my guy, I mean, I pretty much said it all. I'm very much an interior pass rush guy. And I think if you come back, 10 years from now, you're looking back at this class and who's the best player from this class? If somebody told me it was Jeffery Simmons, I wouldn't bat an eye. I think he has a chance to be the best player from this entire class. And given the one gapping the Broncos use on that defensive line, playing between Chubb and Vaughn, I think Simmons could be freaking special.
Real quick, I just want to throw a couple things out there. Chris Lindstrom is the only guy I actually feel is a better fit for the Broncos scheme than Zach Bailey, by the way. And I think that you want to do what you want to do with Quentin Nelson last year. Well, he could play tackle. You just want to plug and play him at guard.
Yeah.
As for Jeffery Simmons, there's one thing you said, Nick, that I just wanted to make clear is with the combine, even if he didn't get injury, Jeffery Simmons would not have been able to participate with the on-field stuff because of the off-field issue. He was only invited for medicals and for interviews and stuff like that because of it.
But we didn't get to see anything we didn't get to see his pro day as well, although he did bench. I know I couldn't find that.
Well, yes. His pro day is a different story, but I was just throwing that out there about the combine.
No, yeah, you're right. You're right. I was mainly talking about we don't have the measurements, so to speak, but kind of like Jalen Ferguson, who had an incident at a McDonald's. He was at the combine, but he couldn't participate in the field drills. So, nope, you are definitely right there. But any thoughts on Jeffery Simmons? Would he be your defensive lineman 3? I know, Carl, you have a very strong. I love Ed Oliver too, but where I was at. Jeffery Simmons was my guy.
Oh, I'd have Simmons over Oliver. I think he's a better fit. I think he's got that huge high up potential. I mean, and I think he's got a higher floor. Honestly, just because of his being that not only athletic but also having that actual size compared to Ed Oliver. But no, I'd have him higher. That injury just really put a damper on that because honestly, right now I'd have him as my top choice to be there at pick 10 for the Broncos if he didn't get injured. Yeah, that would be my guy. I'd be pounding the table for as well. Just going, come on, please take this guy because you put him between Von Miller and Bradley Chubb, it's over. Yeah.
I do want to share a little anecdote. I know the Hawkeyes ended up beating Mississippi State in the Outback Bowl this past season. And after the game, Jeffery Simmons was dominant in that game. Just absolutely destroyed Iowa's run game. The interior offensive line looked horrible. I mean, they couldn't zone block at him to save their life. But afterwards, one of the Iowa coaches went up to him and said, "You're the best player we've played in the last 5 years." No joke. And that's like, they've played some pretty good talent. Saquon Barkley just 2 years ago. There's a fair amount of talent. Nick Bosa 2 years ago. And Jeffery Simmons absolutely eviscerated the Iowa offensive line. Luckily, the pass game and the defense came to play. But, man, he's a special talent. And if the Broncos were to trade back, and let's say 20-25 and Jeffery Simmons there, I don't even care. I mean, if he passed your vetting process, I'm taking him. He has a chance to be special. All right, well, moving on now. Carl, you have speaking of Big Ten, a Big Ten defender.
Yeah, I've kind of gone back and forth on this guy just a little bit, but the more I've watched him, the more I think if you miss out on the Devons early on in this draft, you and I have talked about this a little bit in the past of that linebacker position, those mid to that 3rd to 5th round area. That's where there's going to be some really good guys that you could plug and play a little bit and have some high ceiling guys. And this is one of my high ceiling guys in Blake Cashman of Minnesota. And this guy, I mean, he tested off the charts when he went to the combine. I've said it before on here of if you take the Devons out, this guy probably had the next best combine out of the linebackers. I mean, 40-yard dash of, again, 4.5, 40, vertical jump right there, 37.5 inches, broad jump, 124 inches. I mean, 20-yard short shuttle, 4.12 seconds. I mean, all those are 80 and above percentile. I mean, the big concern you have, it's kind of crazy. He was the opposite ends of the spectrum when you come to the draft. Of the athletic testing, he tested off the charts. The measurements, not quite as good. I mean, he is the T-Rex of this draft by far, but he makes up for it. He's a hard worker. This is the guy, I've said it before, he has worked his tail off to get where he is. He was a guy that walked on at Minnesota, and all of a sudden he worked his way to becoming not only a scholarship player, but he became the captain on the defense. So he has that high character. He has that kind of thing that the Broncos are really looking for when it comes to that guy that's going to lead on the field. Again, he's athletically gifted, so he fits what they want out of that linebacker position. And I think he's a guy that does well dropping back into coverage, but also coming up, helping in the run game. He does well of understanding what the offense is trying to do. There's a lot of plays where it's not only that he was athletically gifted, but I saw him being the one guy that understood what the offense was trying to do and was in position to make a play. He sometimes has some trouble getting off blocks, but a lot of times he beats the blocker to the spot. So, I mean, that's something he's going to have to work on, and it's partly because of his short arms. I mean, he does have those limitations. It's why he's not up there with the Devons of this draft. I mean, those arms are very limiting. It also hurts him on some tackling, where if he's not squared up with the runner, he can really get juked out because he just doesn't have the arms to keep hold of the runner. And so, again, this is why he falls into that 3rd, 4th, 5th kind of range of the draft. I mean, personally, I would take him about 4th round. That's where I would feel pretty comfortable taking a guy like him and thinking the Broncos got really, really good value and a guy that I think could actually develop into a starter. I think he could be a special team star year one if you needed him to. I mean, I think he could even compete to be a starter, honestly, but I mean, at least special teams, because again, he has that speed to get downfield. He's disciplined. He understands what teams are trying to do. There's other than the short arms and just not being quite the size you would like, there's just so many other things to really like about this guy that I'm willing to take a chance. And again, just that high character guy that I know is going to work his tail off are the kind of guys that I just really love to pound the table for. Because again, I think when they come to the NFL, they've always had that mentality of I have to prove myself. Even if he's arrived in the NFL, he still feels like he's got to go out there and prove himself. I look at like Chris Harris. He's one of those guys that still today feels like he has to go out there and prove himself and his worth. And it shows in his work ethic and what he does on the field. And so if the Broncos can get this guy in those mid rounds where they can feel comfortable, where they missed out on the Devons early in the draft, and I just feel like they've got themselves a very future starter for that defense that they feel very comfortable with.
My only concern, well, not my only concern, but my biggest concern is durability. I don't know. Maybe Eric can speak to it, but I know he had some shoulder concerns, and I think I remember hearing that might have been flagged in the medical process at the combine, but maybe I'm misremembering.
He had surgery on both shoulders last offseason, and they got flagged. I'm not sure exactly for the severity or whatever it was, but they did get flagged during the medical checks at the combine, and some teams took him off their board as a result.
Yeah, and given how much he's going to have to rely on those shoulders for his tackling with those T-Rex arms, that's a concern for me. But I mean, his movement skills, whatnot, are very good. Carl, not to call you out, but I feel like you had a higher grade on him earlier. We talked about him not too long ago. I think maybe you said 41, but maybe I'm misremembering.
I did say that at one point.
Okay,
then I watched a couple more games, and there were times where he just wasn't quite. I must have watched a couple of his best games to start off with, and so it got me really hyped about this guy and making some plays in the backfield. And then I watched a couple more, and I was a little bit more down on him, where I felt like he was a little bit more out of position. There were some plays where I felt like he was trying to be too smart, where he was almost trying to like bait the quarterback, but then he found himself out of position.
Yeah.
And it was very frustrating for me to see that. I'm like, just go out there and cover your guy. Let your pass rush win. Don't sit there and try to go make a bigger play than you have to do. Just do your job.
Do your job.
Yes. So, I mean, I feel like I'm not trying to be too much Bill Belichick, but man, I mean, again, I think he got a little too comfortable sometimes with his own athleticism, thinking he could do more than he can. And he does have limitations, and he's got to remember that.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, well, moving it along. Eric, you have a fun player coming up here that I won't lie, I've been intrigued with watching as well.
My next guy is Darius Slayton, a wide receiver out of Auburn. I absolutely really like his play, even in that absolutely trash Auburn offense. This is a guy who he had 6 50-yard plus touchdowns since 2017, and reminds me a lot of DJ Shark from last year. And Denver had a lot of interest in him last year. This was a guy that they were strongly considering at one point. They ended up going a different way. He reminds me quite a bit of that. Obviously, a little bit different in talent level, but he's definitely a poor man's version of him. His long strider has good long speed and is a great deep threat. He's quick to get to his top speed. He's a lot more developed working all three levels of the field over other speedsters like Emanuel Hall. And he does have some issues with his hands and drops and everything like that. He's very quick to turn upfield with the ball in his hand. And it shows that he used to be that he's a state champion in the 100-meter and 200-meter race and track. He has a RAS score of 8.81, which is really great for that. I do have concerns about the drops. I remember watching the Georgia game and how badly he showed up against facing DeAndre Baker. He had just no answer to get off of Baker's press. And that is going to be something that's going to be really concerning at the NFL level when he's going to be facing press a little bit more. He's not always – one reason for the drops is because he's not always ready to deal with passes that have heat on them. And that's going to be a little bit of concern because Joe Flacco on underneath and medium throws, he can put a little bit more velocity on them than is necessary. You will also want to clean up his route running. His ball tracking's just up and down. And as I mentioned, he played in a crap offense at Auburn, and the production doesn't match what traits he shows. And there's just so many reasons because of that, and it all comes down to the Auburn offense. I like his size. I like his speed. I like his quickness. I like all that stuff that you're looking for a guy to not just be a burner down the field and take the top off, but to attack all three levels of him. I would take him in the 5th round. I think that's where he's going to end up going in the draft. And just, he's not a one-trick pony like some other speedsters are in this draft. And it opens up a lot for others on the offense because defenses won't be able to just sit there and plan, oh, hey, this guy's going to go deep every time. Being able to attack the short, the underneath, the intermediate levels of the field is going to make sure that the safeties have to play honest. They can't cheat deep to take out that deep ball of his. They can't cheat short and try to sell out to stop the run because he can take the top off. So he just opens up so much for the offense, would help out the run game, would help out Deshaun Hamilton and Cortland Sutton because of the speed and his other abilities. Guy I absolutely love. And this is a deep receiver class. And if it wasn't so cluttered with guys in that second and third round, I would definitely probably be looking at him as a third round in a normal draft class. But it's just so cluttered that he ended up getting pushed down a little bit.
I like Slayton a lot, but I think he is a diet caffeine-free RC Cola version of Emanuel Hall.
Yeah, but he can stay on the field and actually challenge more areas of the field.
I like him a lot. I can't complain too much. Just got to take a dig. All right, we're going to take one more quick break, but I still got two more guys. Carl and Eric still got one more, but we'll be right back.
This is the Overtime Podcast Network.
All righty, and we are back, and we're going to talk my third pounding the table guy, and you thought I was going to go a whole podcast without talking about the Iowa Hawkeyes. Gosh, you guys are fools. I'm going to talk about
predictable.
Yeah, I know, right? But predictability is a good thing, right? It's, maybe not. Maybe that's a little boring.
Football.
Yeah, if you're a betting man, it can be pretty good. But Amani, speaking about predictably good, Amani Hooker, safety from Iowa, and man, he declared early, I thought he was a guy that would come back this past season, him and Anthony Nelson, and both of them tested much better than people thought. Hat tip to Chris Doyle, strength and conditioning coach at Iowa. He's one of the best in the business, but Hooker had himself a heck of a combine, measuring at almost the 70th percentile or above in almost every single athletic metric: 20-yard shuttle, 3-cone drill, broad jump, vertical jump, 40-yard dash. Not the biggest guy as far as his length and his height, but carries good size, man. He's thick with 2 C's, 210 pounds. So really just look really good. And he also looked good in the drills at the combine as well. I really like him specifically in a zone-heavy scheme because he has just great feel for the zone. He's got great instincts in space, and he can pass off receivers and a natural feel for routes breaking in front of him, all while keeping his eyes on the quarterback. I love that he has ball skills to attack the catch point as well as take the ball away. This past season, he had 4 interceptions with 7 pass breakups, and on the very first play of the game 2 years ago against Ohio State, he had a pick 6 against JT Barrett, and man, the stadium went nuts. So a lot of ball skills, can take the ball away, but also challenge at the catch point. I love his versatility. 2 seasons ago, Iowa played him. They play a lot of cover 2, kind of like the Broncos, more 4-3 cover 2 heavy. But they switched this past season. So 2017, Hooker played a lot of strong safety in the cover 2 in that deep part of the field, one of the 2 deep safeties. And this past season, they changed the defense a little bit to combat the spread. That's a big part of the Big Ten now, especially in the Big Ten West. And you saw Hooker play that kind of heavy nickelback, or the star position as they call it. So it's kind of, you see that slot cornerback there in today's NFL. Well, instead, the Iowa Hawkeyes used a safety to kind of counteract the quick pass game, the screens, and the run game, the power spread, so to speak, that you see in college football so much. So really versatile player, a lot of cover 2 usage, and his ability in the start of this past season won him Big Ten Defensive Back of the Year. I love watching him play because number 27, Amani Hooker, is always around the ball and moving towards the direction of the ball, really caught out of position. Like I said, a thick player. He's physical against the run and the catch point and can press as well. Hakeem Butler, who seems to be everybody's ascending wide receiver in this class. Amani Hooker lined up against Hakeem Butler in the slot was really a pretty sight to be sold. Hakeem Butler's, 6'5", just a monster. Amani Hooker took it to him in the slot, pressing him, not letting Hakeem Butler get off of him. Just really physical in that way. And he's an efficient run defender and has ability to match up with move tight ends, which obviously is something the Broncos have been really lacking. Now, some cons. He is a limited player as far as his radius, and he's going to let some tackles slide off because of that. He's got. We talked about Cashman a little bit ago with the T-Rex arms. Well, Hooker's got T-Rex arms as well. The 6th percentile with the arm length, 9th percentile with the wingspan for a safety. So that catch radius is going to be a concern with him, or not the catch radius, but the tackle radius, the arm length is going to be a concern with him. And you see it a little bit on tape. Not horrible, but it can be an issue. And he also doesn't have amazing burst. He's not the most twitched up player, not very violent. He's more controlled and collected in his movements. Sometimes he can bite on play action, looking to make a play, and he's not going to fit all defenses. If you're looking for a guy who can play deep cover 1, he's not your guy. If you're looking to play a lot more man coverage, I don't think he's your guy. But if you're looking for a versatile safety as far as playing that nickel, playing cover 2, strong safety with zone, I think he's a guy that you would like. a lot in that type of defense, especially with the ball skills, which is something that's really valuable. I think his draft grade is a mid-round 3 for me, but given Denver's cover 2 transition and need for a safety to kind of push Will Parks, and with Simmons and Parks going to be free agents next year, I'd have no issue with taking Hooker at 71 because I think he's a great fit for the defense. Like I said, he tested surprisingly well at the combine and everything, and with his ball skills, his assuredness in zone, and his technically sound tackling. I mean, he's always going to be the catch radius is not great. I think he'd be a great fit for this defense, and if he's there at 71, I'd have no issue with taking the Iowa Hawkeye there.
I just want to throw this out there that Hooker has an early 4th round grade for me, and the only reason for that is because he played for Iowa. No, not really. I actually really like him. I love his fit with Denver, and I'm glad you had him on your guy I really like, and a guy that I was like getting to.
Yeah, I didn't. I honestly, we did an episode last week about scheme fits, guys that we were like scheme fit wise,
yep.
And I would have had Hooker on there if I didn't already have him as a guy I would pound the table for.
Yeah, he absolutely fits this Broncos defensive scheme, and you're spot on with both Simmons and Parks set to be free agents after this year, and that need for a guy like Hooker could definitely see it happening. But again, I actually do have him as an early 4th round grade, but it's more so because of just there's so much. There's actually quite a bit of talent in earlier on at safety.
Yeah.
I mean, you're not elite talent that are guys that are surefire 1st round picks, but 2nd, 3rd round, there's quite a bit of guys. And it's kind of like with Slayton. He just kind of got pushed down a little bit.
Yeah. Juwan Thornhill, Darnell Savage, Dante Thompson, Taylor Rapp, Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, et cetera, et cetera. But for me, just because he's such a good fit, and I think he's being slept on still, and he tested good athletically. I mean, there's a lot to like there. So I had to call him out. But moving on now, we got Carl here with his last guy, and somebody that I think a lot of people have heard of before. But Carl, I'll leave it to you.
Well, I decided I had to get at least one quarterback on this podcast, even if it is a weak quarterback class. It really comes down to, this is my top quarterback that I think is just the best fit with the Broncos. I like a lot of what Kyler Murray brings to the table, but I just think with what the Broncos want to do, Drew Lock is that perfect fit. And he's a guy he's been captain. He's worked, we've talked about this before, he's worked through a lot of things there at Missouri it was a pretty chaotic situation. Coaching changes, the whole riots and protests and everything else that were going around. It was surrounding the football program. And yet here's a guy that kind of helped keep things together, kept them at least competitive. They weren't the best team, obviously, being in the SEC, but they at least were pretty competitive, and especially here at the end of the year, they were playing lights out. And a lot of that was because of Drew Lock. He was having some of his best football, and he's worked through, like I said, coaching changes, offensive scheme changes, and he's continued to perform very well. And if there's a quarterback I'm willing to pound the table for, it's this guy. I think with the Broncos and what they want out of the quarterback, he just is. He's that great fit. You tweeted it out. I think, was it last week, Nick, about what guys can do outside the pocket?
Yeah, the ability to extend plays and make plays outside of structure and not being totally dependent on the offensive line. Something
right.
that I'm having to come back around to, re-examining my Josh Rosen love and the early success of Darnold and Allen.
Right. And, again, some of those guys, that's what they're able to do is you look at today's NFL, you're looking at that athleticism on the defensive line and the linebacker position. It's just offensive lines are at a very big disadvantage from the get-go. And then you look at, they're just not trained very well in college. I think somebody had asked on Twitter something about why offensive linemen are not thought of as high in the draft compared to what they're getting paid in free agency. Well, free agency, you know what they are. So you're getting a guy that you can plug in day one and know what they're going to be on the field. Draft, it's tough to tell. You don't have many guys that are NFL ready day one to be a quality starter for you. There's not many Quentin Nelsons in drafts. And so again, if you could have a quarterback that can do some things outside the scheme of the play, that's a huge advantage for you. The Chiefs this last year, Patrick Mahomes was one of the best quarterbacks I've ever seen when you're talking about making things happen outside the scheme of the play. And so getting a quarterback that can do some of that, he can, and then you throw in, he's great at play action. I think he would be that perfect fit of being able to challenge every ounce of the field, of course, with his arm, but he can get outside the pocket. He can make throws on the run. He can make defenses have to stay honest to what they're doing. So I think he's a great complement to the run game that the Broncos have. I think he's one of those guys that coaches really love. I think he's a smart kid that wants to work hard. Just listening to him talk, he's one of those guys that just sounds very intelligent in what he's doing. He knows what his weaknesses are. He knows what he's got to work on. Those are big things. And I love, he's also got that 4 years of starting experience. This is where I have some issues with Haskins. He did great in his 1 year, but there's a lot of adjustments that happened in that second year. And also just his ability to play outside the scheme of things is another big issue for me. But again, I mean, and I just think that Locke is one of those guys that I think he can be ready to start quicker than people think. I'm not saying that he's going to start year one. I think it would be good if Flacco can go out there and do well and Locke can get a year to really work on his footwork, because, I mean, that is a huge weakness of his. But it is one of the few things that you can really clean up on a quarterback. If you're working on throwing motion, I mean, I remember this with Tim Tebow. People kept saying, if he works on his throwing motion, and he would say, I'm working with somebody, some quarterback guru to clean up my throwing motion. That just doesn't work for quarterbacks. That always seems to go back to your natural fit of what you've grown up doing. Thankfully, that's not what you have to work on with Locke. If you can work on that footwork and get them to be better with their feet, and I think he can become one of those quarterbacks that's very, very consistent. I don't think he's ever going to be the top quarterback in the NFL by any means, but I think he's a guy that you can come in and see some very good quality quarterback play, and you can build a team around him. At pick 10, he's probably, I mean, other than Quinnen Williams, Ed Oliver, Devin White, he is my next guy. And I think he's the one that has the most potential to actually be there at 10 for the Broncos to take. And if they can get him, I'm going to feel pretty comfortable about where our quarterback position is going moving forward.
Yep, you won't hear me complaining too much. I am coming back around. It's kind of in a whirlwind, like Locke, don't like Locke, don't like Locke. Coming back around, I'd be perfectly fine with him at 10. Obviously, there's risk, but payoff is huge, and I think scheme fit is a big reason. But speaking of scheme fit, for me, my next guy I'm going to pound the table for, it's a tight end. I didn't tease this guy yet, but it's Foster Moreau from Louisiana State, and he's been a guy that's been extremely underutilized while at LSU, but he really caught my eye watching practices, watching the game of the Senior Bowl, because, man, he got after it as a blocker, and then he went out there at the Combine and was even more impressive. Really solid size. I mean, prototypical size for a tight end, 6'4" 1/8", 253 pounds, but really long arm length and wingspan, 33.5 inches, so pretty good there. And then he tested really great athletically, 4'6", 640, vertical jump at 36.5 inches, 121-inch broad jump, a 3-cone of 7.16, 20-yard shuttle, which was ridiculously good at 4.11 seconds. That's 95th percentile. And a solid bench press despite the long arms with 22 reps. So really just a pretty good combine performer. And for me, the thing that really draws me to him watching his tape at LSU is he gets after it as a run blocker. Oftentimes at LSU, who's been running the ball really effectively with him there, they ran behind him as a blocker. He stays square and he blocks angry. And I think he's both solid in line and on the move. And I really like him in outside zone concepts at LSU, where he's good at working to that second level, which, hello, Denver Broncos, that outside zone, I think it's going to become a pretty big part of this offense going forward. He might be a better blocker than TJ Hawkinson right now. I think Hawkinson still can improve there as far as core strength. I mean, he came to Iowa as a 215-pound wide receiver. But Moreau right now, really good blocker. And he sustains his blocks and drives players as well. He can really get some movement, even lined up against defensive linemen, which for a tight end, one-on-one getting movement against defensive linemen, I love that. Hand placement inside the frame is also good as well. So that's all blocking compliments to him. He's a really good blocker. I really do like his ability after the catch as well. He's not really the most elusive, but like his blocking, he plays angry when he's got the ball in his hands. He'll drag some guys with him and fight for some extra yards, and you're going to have to bring it to him if you're going to tackle him. Very underrated athlete, as we saw with his combine numbers, and he plays angry, plays with the whistle, wants to bury his man, and he's tough over the middle. He does have the speed to stretch the seam vertically as a route runner, although, again, not really utilized in that way at LSU. That said, he's very raw as a route runner right now. We saw the athleticism in the testing. He's one of those guys I had to go back to the tape because his route running, his ability to separate versus linebackers, underneath coverage, everything like that, it's just not there right now. I do think he can develop it, but it's not there. The plain and simple, it's not there. Not very nuanced as a route runner, not very fluid in and out of his breaks, and hasn't shown, despite the size, hasn't shown a great catch radius. And honestly, about the blocking, sometimes he can be over-aggressive as a blocker and overextend. My round grade for him is round 5. I do think, though, if the Broncos, considering the Houston pick is late, I'd have no issue taking him round 4. Personally, I'd love him with their first pick round 5. I think he's a great fit for what they need as a blocker. I think Hireman, I mean, you're talking about the better receivers, Dax Raymond, Josh Oliver, Cale Warren, etc. All valid arguments if you're looking for that kind of guy. But I think Moreau, with his ability as a blocker and the upside as a receiver, especially that athleticism, he's going to get after it. You're going to have no question about this guy's going to make some sort of impact for that team, just as a blocker. I mean, we saw what Nick Boyle got paid. We saw what Tyler Kroft got paid. We saw what, who was the one that went to Detroit that got paid big money? Name escaping me right now. It'll come back to me. Anyway, these blocking tight ends are getting paid right now, and I think Moreau has a chance to be really good, and I would really like his fit in this scheme, especially, again, we've been talking about it, this offensive identity for the Broncos, run first. It's going to be a run-heavy team, so having a guy that can block and get after it that way, with the athletic upside still, I'd really be a big fan of Foster Moreau. Oh, and also one last thing. Sorry, I'm getting all excited. He was voted as a team captain given the very highly regarded number 18 number, which is voted for by his teammates for a guy who's exemplary on and off the field as a leader in the locker room and with his leadership as a person. So, drafting high character guys, Foster Moreau is another one of those dudes.
I think he would be a great fit. Again, I mean, this tight end class, there's a lot of guys you can sit here and say that would be a great player to add to this team. So
it's like the opposite argument for linebacker, right? Like they're both kind of like, yeah, middle tier, lower tier value when you're talking about pass rush, cornerback, tackle, quarterback. But the depth for tight end is amazing. And then you have just a huge missing amount of talent for those day 2 guys for linebacker.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, but again, if you get this guy late round, man, I
run behind.
I would get excited about that. That is for sure. And again, if you keep adding to this offense and you look at that defense and what they have and you add a couple pieces to them, and this team's right back on track.
Yeah, I can't disagree. Well, speaking about mid-round linebackers, Erick Trickel, you're up, buddy.
Well, I couldn't go through this whole thing with just offensive players, so I went with my favorite linebacker in this class. And don't get me wrong, I really like Devin White. I think Devin Bush is a solid guy. I like other linebackers, but Germaine Pratt, the linebacker out of North Carolina State, he's probably my favorite one. I like how he's big. He's 240 pounds, and he's moves really smoothly and very fluid in coverage, which is something that I really like. He's a former defensive back, and it definitely shows that movement ability in coverage. That's where it comes from, is that defensive back history in him. He's got good enough speed, good enough range. He does well sorting through the traffic to get to the ball carrier. He's fast to his spot and zone coverage. He can take tight ends and most running backs in man coverage. Like, frame's great, athleticism's great, good chasing burst. Like, there's a lot of positives for it, and even more. He was a leader, team captain, has good football IQ, played both inside linebacker and outside linebacker at North Carolina State, even though in the NFL he's just going to be basically you're going to want him in that will position to cover linebacker. And I love his fit with Denver. They run the right scheme for him. They're going to have the guys next to him in either Todd Davis or Josie Jewell to take on blocks for him to help keep him clean, to find the ball carrier, which is what he's going to need, because he struggles to get off blocks, and his technique taking on blocks is really bad. That's definitely going to be an area of focus for them. But you're pairing him with the right coaches in Denver to work on that aspect of him. I can't say how much I actually love his play. And this is a guy that I've been pretty high on for quite a while. I can't remember when I first mentioned him to you, Nick, but it was end of last year? November, December, or something like that?
Yep.
And he does lack starting experience, even though he did play off and on, subbed in and out over the last couple of years. This last year was his first year as a full-time starter. But again, Denver needs that guy who can take out tight ends and cover them really well. Don't have to worry about him doing that. His sideline to sideline speed is good enough. And again, don't need to worry about him taking on defenders because that's going to be Josie Jules or Todd Davis's responsibility. I have him as an early third-round grade, and I would take him in a heartbeat in the third round. And I would even consider moving up into the late second to secure him if need be. I've contemplated even moving him ahead of Mack Wilson because of how poorly Mack Wilson has done through the draft process, but haven't actually done it, have considered it. But I really love Pratt, and I think, again, just a guy who fits the defense so perfectly, gives them exactly what they need on this defense, and really would help bring the defense, make the defense kind of whole again. I mean, you still need a couple pieces here and there, but this is the one piece on that whole defense that's absolutely missing, that linebacker who can cover tight ends. Pratt does that.
I do have one question for you here before we wrap it up with Pratt. Are you concerned about his ability to engage and disengage with blockers and play between the tackles, play through the trees, as some like to say?
I am, but again, that's kind of what the whole Todd Davis and Josie Jewell, that what they're supposed to be there for, that's their strong suit. That's what they're supposed to be. That's what they're going to be doing when it is the run play is between the tackles. They're going to be the main guys on attack there. He's the guy who's the linebacker is going to be covering the sideline to sideline. So he's not going to be attacking head on. It's we saw it a lot with Brandon Marshall over the last couple of years, and especially with Danny Trevathan. Danny Trevathan would be the guy to attack between the tackles. With Brandon Marshall, they're kind of behind him and making sure that the play doesn't get behind him. So that's kind of what I would be assuming is the same kind of thing that we see with Todd Davis or Josie Jewell and Germaine Pratt.
And I lied. One more thing. Watching him, and I kind of see it, but I feel like some people really hype on this. Do you have concerns with stiffness in the hips, his ability to flip his hips and chase guys downs or cover in that way? Because I see, reading reports, hearing people talk about him, everybody comes back to the stiffness in his hips and limiting him as far as his ability in coverage.
I do think he is a little stiff in the hips, but I don't think it's as big of a concern as other people do. I think he's good and has good enough burst, is a good enough athlete to help cover up that whole stiffness issue that he has.
Alrighty. Well, any takeaways, guys? Do you have any honorable mentions or anything you want to throw out there?
No, I'm good, man. I think this is a really good list. Definitely some names that I could see the Broncos being very, very excited about and wanting to see them on their team. And I think we got a good mix of guys early in the draft and late in the draft of people that could be targeted.
I'm just glad that neither of you had Ed Oliver. I've been so tired of having to bash this guy because I absolutely love him. He's my number 3 player. And I feel bad because I'm bashing him as much as I am when I absolutely love what he does. So I'm glad that neither of you had him on here because I probably would have logged off.
All right, one more question. A guy you'd pound the table not to take in this class. I do not want him.
Daniel Jones.
Daniel Jones, yeah. If he was there round 3, I'd have no issue with it. But
right.
I saw Daniel Jones mock had him 6 overall.
What I'm seeing, when I'm seeing people say he's not going to make it past pick 15, and I mean I don't disagree that it very much could be the case. I would be very, very upset if the Broncos took him there at 10.
Don't have to worry about that.
Okay.
I'm going to sleep better.
But he won't get past 17 at the very least because the Giants are dumb because they took a running back at number 2 last year.
Man, they could have had baby cake Sam Darnold. Speaking of thick. My gosh. All right, we'll move on. Eric, do you have any that you're pounding the table not to take?
Yes, I have one. This is a guy, and it's not Ed Oliver. But just throw that out there. If people follow me on Twitter, they know my issues with Ed Oliver and the Broncos. But the guy that I absolutely, no matter what team I run, no matter what defense I run, this is a guy that I do not want, Greedy Williams. I don't care how athletically gifted you are. If you are so unafraid to be physical, you shouldn't be playing football.
Hey, it worked for Deion Sanders.
In an older time.
That's true.
Where you didn't see athletes like him.
Yeah. I just thought that's always the contrarian argument.
Yeah.
So.
I mean, I guess you can bring up Darrelle Revis too, but I mean, he wasn't completely afraid of contact.
Dominique Rodriguez party in the Super Bowl.
God, yes. I mean, it's not that he can't work because of his athleticism, I just don't want to have to worry about them getting to the edge and my cornerback not making the tackle. Like that's my thing, is I don't want to have to worry about that, and you have to worry about that with Greedy Williams, along with the concerns about him being lazy and his work and his effort. I mean, they're on the Alabama tape, and you see all this stuff. Like I just cannot get on board with him about being like that. That's the kind of things that I look for, and this is a guy that I would take off my board if I were an NFL general manager because of. I don't care how athletically gifted you are. If those things show up, no.
I guess I'll throw one out there before we wrap it up. For me, I think he's very insanely talented athletically, but I mean, it's just too concerning for me because it's not there on tape, and that's Rashawn Gary. Kind of.
I agree.
Of defensive line. Scared. It's scary. Really scary for me.
I agree so much. Like, I see so many people just touting that he is a top 5 pick for sure, and he might. I don't see it.
Yeah,
but yeah, I agree. And then DK Metcalf, he's another one.
I'm okay with DK.
No.
I think the tape.
Well, it depends on where you're taking DK Metcalf at for me. I'll throw that out there. It's not like Greedy Williams were not at all. It just depends on where for Metcalf.
All right, well, that's going to wrap up today's episode of Building the Broncos, powered by Overtime Media. You can find Carl on Twitter at Carl Dumler and myself at Nick Kendell. Also, make sure you follow Erick Trickel at Erick Trickel. Make sure you head over to Mile High Huddle, an affiliate of 24/7 Sports, and CBS Sports Digital to find more content covering the Denver Broncos. Head on over to iTunes and leave us a 5-star rating and comment. Your support can help us continue to bring you our Denver Bronco deep dives. You can follow the Building the Broncos podcast and all our other great audio content by subscribing to the Huddle Up podcast wherever you listen to your shows. You can follow us on Twitter at Mile High Huddle and at BTB Football Pod. For Carl and Eric, I'm Nick, wrapping up another episode of the Building the Broncos podcast. Guys, we're almost there. 9 days away. We hope you listeners.
I know, 9 days away until Endgame.
Oh, nerd. We hope you enjoyed it, and we will see you guys soon. Go Broncos.